From the Digital Media Center on the campus of Southern Oregon University in Ashland, Oregon. This is Ramping Up Your English, an educational program for intermediate level English language learners. Here's your host for Ramping Up Your English, John Letts.
Welcome to Ramping Up Your English, an educational support program for intermediate level English learners. I'm your host and producer, John Letts. This is episode 110, part of our content-based approach in our thematic unit on Native Americans. As the United States pushed westward, Native American groups became deeply divided, even sometimes within their own groups. Let's watch this video, Divided. When Sauk War Chief Black Hawk surrendered, he may have expected death, but after a brief time of imprisonment, he was given a tour of East Coast cities. Black Hawk found himself treated as a celebrity, making public appearances, signing autographs, and given tours of military installations. While Black Hawk was treated as a celebrity back east, he was hung in effigy by angry crowds in Detroit on his return trip. Just as the United States were divided in their reactions to Black Hawk, Indian nations were divided in how to respond to the land-grabbing expansion of the United States. The struggle between Europeans and Native Americans is characterized by cruel, violent, and savage behavior on both sides of the conflict. Non-combatants, including children, were sometimes fatal and intentional victims in the numerous wars that were carried on. Settlers and the army killed non-combatants in attacks on Indian villages. It should also be noted that when Native American villages were burned and their food supplies destroyed, children died of hunger and exposure. At the Battle of Bad Axe, women and children trying to swim across the Mississippi River were targeted and killed by gunfire by the U.S. Army. Neither side had a monopoly on killing non-combatants. The end of hostilities often meant the return to colonists of captured children. This was a time of strong emotions for everyone. Captured children often bonded with their captors, forming familiar bonds with the Indians with which they lived. It was hard on these surrogate parents to part with the child. It was also difficult on the colonial parents to see the reluctance of their child to return. In some cases, the children ran away back to the Native American community with which they felt more comfortable. Even in the cruelest of times, though, acts of unexpected kindness occurred. During the removal to Indian country, white people on farms and in small towns responded to the suffering of the exiles by giving them food and blankets. Mandy Yepaw learned that her Cherokee ancestor was cared for by a white family during the deadly migration to Indian country.
My Cherokee ancestor actually is a survivor of the Trail of Tears. His name is John Mahi, and I believe he's I think it's like 4 greats, great grandfather. And he was on the Trail of Tears with his family. They came from, who knows, somewhere probably around Virginia or Florida or somewhere in there. And then they marched all the way to Missouri. And on that way, his whole family died. And he was only 7 years old when he arrived in Missouri, all by himself. I mean, with the other Cherokee tribe on the Trail of Tears, but his immediate family was all gone, his mother and father and any siblings that he had. So he was adopted into a white family, the Thompsons, and Missouri adopted him and raised him.
There were also numerous examples of Native Americans adopting white children who had no families. removal and the events leading to it caused deep divisions among the Cherokee. Historians call it the Shoshonean expansion, the entrance onto the Great Plains by a band who became known later as the Comanche. The Great Plains offered a seemingly endless supply of bison, but the Comanche also sought horses. At one time, most horses finding themselves on the market at St. Louis was supplied by Comanche bands through their trading partners. The Comanches also sought dominance on the southern plains, and they achieved this through hunting, trading, raiding, and warfare. The Comanches were among the first to adapt to horses, and they became masters at using horses for hunting bison and warfare. The Comanches formed into independent bands with family connections, and there was no central authority over those bands. There also were no peace chiefs. These bands were led by war chiefs. They made fairly quick work of pushing most Apaches to the west of Texas, forming bonds with groups that suffered under Apache aggression. One such group was the Wichita, who became a major trade partner of the Comanches. Mexican authorities struggled with finding some way of controlling the Comanches. Some Native American groups fleeing aggression in the east were welcome to settle in Texas, but they provided little protection from the violence of the Comanches. The Great Plains of North America was a destination of numerous surrounding Indian tribes. From the west, the Comanches, the Utes, and the Shoshone descended from the Rocky Mountains. From the north, the Plains Cree and the Blackfoot expanded. From the east, a number of tribes had been pushed west by European rivalries and the United States. Many of these groups had once lived in the Ohio Valley and in the Great Lakes region, trading woodland economies and cultures for those of the Great Plains. One of these Great Lake groups was the Cheyenne. They had once lived in what is now Minnesota, where they were close allies with the Arapaho and had mostly friendly relations with the Sioux. Since the Ojibwa had obtained guns from the French before the Cheyenne had, the Ojibwa were able to push them across the Missouri River into North and South Dakota. This is where the Cheyennes developed the horse culture. They expanded into the Black Hills and the Powder River Basin. This is where they introduced horses to the Sioux. After a time, the Lakota Sioux pushed the Cheyenne out of the Black Hills. The Kiowa once inhabited the heart of the Great Plains, but they were no match for the Cheyenne expansion into this region, which pushed the Kiowa south. With the help of the Arapaho, the Cheyenne came to control an extensive territory. There were 10 bands of the Cheyenne, and some of those bands continued south to the Cimarron River. The Sun Dance brought all the bands together for fellowship, forgiveness, healing, and spiritual renewal. For the Southern Cheyenne, their presence in the South did not go unchallenged. The Cheyenne and the Arapaho fought the allied Comanche, Kiowa, and Plains Apache. In 1840, they all made an alliance with each other, allowing the Cheyenne to hunt on the Llano Estacado. The Cheyenne in the north made an alliance with the Lakota Sioux, expanding their territory there. The Cheyenne escaped the smallpox epidemic sweeping the northern plains by fleeing to the mountains. But the cholera epidemic in 1849 killed many Cheyenne. The Cheyenne were often in battles against their main enemies, including the Crow, the Blackfoot, Shoshone, Flathead, Nez Perce, and others. They also fought the Osage, the Pawnee, Wichita, and Apache bands as they probed into those territories on hunting and trading ventures. In 1851, the Cheyenne signed a treaty with the United States at Fort Laramie. The Indian agents recognized most of the territory controlled by the Cheyenne. In agreeing not to attack immigrants on the Oregon Trail, the Cheyenne were provided some cash and supplies from the United States. They agreed to allow passage through their country and the building of forts by the U.S. Army. In 1856, after an incident that wounded a Cheyenne warrior, Indians attacked an immigrant party near Fort Kearny. The United States sent a punitive expedition of 400 soldiers after the Cheyenne, resulting in the first battle between the Cheyenne and the United States Army. The Cheyenne drew their spiritual strength through sacred objects. They went into battle with sacred medicine arrows, which were captured once by an enemy, causing the warriors to retreat. The Cheyenne were also keepers of the sacred buffalo hat. The Oregon Trail had a major impact on Native Americans in the West. The trail stretched from Independence, Missouri to the Willamette Valley in Oregon, crossing the lands of various Native American tribes on the Great Plains, the Intermountain West, and the Columbia River Basin. The fur trade introduced white trappers to Native Americans on the Great Plains. This competition spurred the Hudson Bay Company to establish trading posts along the York Express, ending in Oregon country with Fort Vancouver operating along the Columbia River. The Oregon country was jointly claimed by England and the United States. Traders fanned out widely from England's Fort Vancouver. The head of the fort, Chief Factor John McLaughlin, supervised the trade that passed through the fort. McLaughlin maintained good relations with Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest. Cannons were never fired in anger at Native Americans. As chief factor, John McLaughlin looked after the interest of the company and of England. Now, part of his mission was to discourage settlement by people from the United States. But the immigrants had strong motivation to come to Oregon. Free land was their reward, the promise of a good life. Many left home back east with the stated desire to run the English out of Oregon country, but most would not have survived to do so without the help of John McLaughlin. He provided medical services, seeds, food, and farm implements on credit, giving them a chance to establish themselves on land they received from the United States government, land that belonged to the Native Americans. The Oregon Trail immigrants would also have failed had it not been for support from various groups of Native Americans along the trail. Food was replenished through trade with Native Americans. Dangerous river crossings were made safer with help from Indians. Passage across Indian land was arranged with the Cheyenne and other indigenous groups through treaties. And although immigrants feared attacks by Native Americans, such attacks were rare. Far more pioneers died of disease and self-inflicted gunshots than from Native American arrows. Immigrants encountered bison and killed them for meat, and only meat, wasting the rest of the carcass. They hunted other animals as well, causing a shortage of food for the Native Americans in whose territory they passed. Even worse, they spread disease for which the Indians had no immunity. Along with traders, immigrants spread smallpox one year and cholera the next years. Some travelers lived long enough to get medical help at Whitman Mission from Dr. Marcos and his wife Narcissa. Some lived long enough for medical help from Dr. John McLaughlin at Fort Vancouver. Many died before they could get help, but there was no hope for most Native Americans who contracted those diseases. They died in droves. There were raids on immigrants for horses and for food supplies when local people became desperate. Raids were frequently followed by punitive army action, sometimes against indigenous groups who had not participated in the raids. Some Oregon Trail migrants went to California instead of the Pacific Northwest. When James Marshall discovered gold at Sutter's Fort, attempts to keep the find secret failed, and soon word of California gold spread all the way to the East Coast. People came from all over the world to stake claims and work them. This greatly increased traffic on the Oregon-California Trail. Then that brought with it more problems for Native Americans, in whose territory the trail passed. As trail traffic increased, the nature of the Oregon-California Trail changed, with less dependence on friendly Native Americans. An overland trail was established around Mount Hood, avoiding dangerous passage on the Columbia River. Eventually, there was the end of the trail, the Willamette Valley, and Oregon City. This experience for Native Americans was seen much differently. The decimation of their hunting grounds meant hunger and starvation for their families. At Trail's End, the homeland of Native Americans in the Willamette Valley and beyond were forcefully taken, leaving those people destitute. In the Texas territory of Mexico, General Julio Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna attacked separatists from the United States. But the separatists won, resulting in the Republic of Texas. The Texas Republic would no longer host some of the Native Americans that had been welcomed by New Spain and Mexico, to be a buffer between Euro-Americans and the Comanches and what was left of the Apaches. The absentee band of the Shawnee people were told they had to leave. When Texas was admitted as a state, Mexico broke diplomatic relations. President Polk sent General Zachary Taylor to Texas to provoke war with Mexico, which he did. There were numerous battles with many soldiers killed on both sides. Known in the United States as the War with Mexico, the U.S. Army pushed south into Mexico, meeting spirited resistance from the Mexican Army. The war was ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, wherein Mexico sold much of the American Southwest to the United States. Now, New Mexico and parts of other states were United States territories. Latinos in Texas and the Southwest never crossed the border to become U.S. citizens. The border crossed them. The Apaches were some of the first Native Americans to adopt the horse culture. They lived in different bands, but their lives all revolved around bison. The horse made them much more effective hunters of bison, or buffalo. Many bands had friendly relations with the Pueblos, whom they regarded as valued trade partners. Spanish missions reduced the Pueblos to servitude, leaving them very little time to produce the clothing and other items they traded with the Apaches. Soon, trading turned to raiding, an activity in which the Apaches were successful. As their raids increased, they made enemies of the surrounding tribes, so the Comanches pushed the Apaches out of much of Texas fairly quickly, with help from their neighbors. Many Apaches moved west, while others raided the Spanish at San Antonio. By the time that the United States controlled the region, Apaches raided into Mexico. When the United States signed treaties with Mexico, the U.S. agreed to stop the Apache raids. Early experiences with the United States were positive for the Apache. Colonel Kearny made friendly contact with the Apaches, and they were glad to see enemies of the Mexicans. Apache leaders agreed to let the United States Army use Apache Pass in their invasion of Mexico. At the conclusion of the U.S. war with Mexico, the Apaches signed a peace treaty with the United States, recognizing the U.S. as conquerors of Mexico. This began good relations between Apaches and settlers from the United States.
Oh,
The Pawnee people lived for centuries at the eastern edge of the Great Plains. These speakers of the Caddoan language built settlements near rivers and creeks, farming the fertile land near streams. They lived in large cone-shaped dwellings. The roof was strong enough to hold the weight of several people. Their social organization mirrored that of the Caddo people, a highly stratified system of inherited power. A very important ceremony to the Pawnees was the Morning Star ritual, which involved human sacrifice. The victim was usually a captive. The Pawnee were surrounded by people with different languages and different customs. They maintained their territory pretty well until tribes were pushed west from the other side of the Mississippi River. The Pawnee had a close alliance with the Kiowa. The Pawnee were early signers of treaties with the United States, the first as early as 1818. They ceded land in what became Oklahoma and elsewhere, hoping for protection from invaders. An unrelated group that was also surrounded by hostile tribes was the Crow. The Crow had once lived near Lake Erie in Ohio. They were pushed west by better armed and more aggressive people. The westward movement of the Cheyenne and the Sioux forced the Crow westward again, overtaking territory from the Shoshone in today's Montana. The Crow allied with the Kiowa and Plains Apache, but did not move south with them. Like all Plains tribes, the Crows lived by hunting bison. The Crows celebrated the sun dance and included a doll figure as powerful medicine. Once they settled in the Yellowstone Valley, the Crow divided into 4 bands: the Mountain Crow, the River Crow, the Kicked-in-the-Bellies, and the Beaver dries its fur. They were often at war with the Cheyenne. So soon the Crow were surrounded by enemies. A vision by Chief Plenty Coues, when he was only 10 years old, urged the Crows to seek and keep good relations with the United States. When the U.S. Army began building forts along the Bozeman Trail, Crows helped the garrisons. The Nez Perce greeted the first salmon run of the year with ceremony, honoring the swimmers in hopes of their annual return. To the east, some Nez Perce would meet up with their Crow allies on the Great Plains to hunt bison. These would include joyful reunions with friends, daring hunts, and raids on enemies. These hunting expeditions could include up to 1,000 Indians moving on to the plains from the Columbia Plateau. Along with the Nez Perce were their neighbors, the Cayuse. To their west, the Cayuse allowed missionaries Marcus and Narcissa Whitman to build a mission on Cayuse land. As more Oregon Trail immigrants came through the Whitman mission, the Cayuse became concerned that the mission was for the benefit of the immigrants rather than the Cayuse. Sick pioneers sought the help of Marcus Whitman, who was a doctor. When an epidemic of measles began spreading, Dr. Whitman ministered to immigrants and Cayuse alike. However, while the immigrants often recovered, Cayuse children were dying. Convinced that the Whitmans were poisoning them, the Cayuse killed the Whitmans and others at the mission. Soldiers under the command of Washington Governor Stevens pursued the Cayuse, killing many who were not involved in the killing of the missionaries, eventually capturing the leaders of the Whitman massacre, and they were hanged. The Cayuse War resulted in unrest throughout the Pacific Northwest inland tribes and those near Puget Sound. The troubles in the Northwest were not a major focus of the United States. The country was polarized by the issue of slavery. When Abraham Lincoln was elected president, years of compromise collapsed. Southern states pulled out of the Union, including Texas, despite impassioned pleas by Sam Houston to stay in. When Fort Sumter was attacked by South Carolina, the war was on. Recruiters from both the Union and the South sought support from Native Americans. This divided the Cherokee. Some Cherokee supporters of the North had to relocate to Kansas to escape violence from Cherokees fighting for the South. An 1851 treaty ceded a huge area of Sioux land to the United States and began the reservation era for 4 bands of the Sioux. In 1862, a crop failure and the late arrival of food from the United States reduced the Sioux in Minnesota to starvation. After decades of broken promises, trickery, and audacious corruption, the Dakota Sioux in Minnesota were out of options. Desperate and angry, Sioux warriors took action. One after another, white settlers were attacked and killed. More Sioux warriors joined in, and more farms were attacked and settlers killed. Settlers fought back, and those who could sought safety at forts and blockhouses. At Wood Lake, the Sioux who rose up were defeated by soldiers, and this is where most of the violence ended. Sioux warriors surrendered at Camp Release, where captured settlers were returned and fighters awaited their fate. Some fled to Canada with war leader Little Crows. Little Crows soon returned to Minnesota, where he was killed by a settler who collected a bounty. Little Crow's head was put on display in St. Paul. The Sioux Indian War was a nightmare for white settlers, many of them traumatized by witnessing the killing of family members and the destruction of their farms. Later in 1862, courts-martial found 303 Dakota Sioux guilty of murder and rape. With no attorneys and no witnesses allowed to testify, they were sentenced to hang. President Lincoln commuted the sentences of all but 38. The others were forced into prison, where most died. Most Dakota Sioux had refused to join the uprising, but the reservations were closed to all Sioux, and all treaty payments stopped, and soon there were virtually no Sioux remaining in Minnesota. Good Thunder and Sarah later returned to live out the rest of their days in Minnesota. White settlers continued to pour in. With that, we close episode 110. Join me next time for Ramping Up Your English. Thanks for watching. I'm John Letts.
You've been watching Ramping Up Your English, a support program for intermediate level English language learners. Learn more. Visit our website at letscreate.org. You can also watch or download today's program at archive.org/details/roguetv. Join us next time on RBTV Voices for Ramping Up Your English.